Education is the great equalizer in America today. It opens up doors, allows for the possibilities of excellence, and is the cornerstone contributor to innovation and making progress towards advancing the next generation of leadership forward. However, in the U.S., according to my friends over at research.com, we've got more work to do to place students on a winning path forward in America in order to maximize their potential and seize their moment of growth from an educational and personal perspective. Overall, it's estimated that American students place 24th in reading, 38th in mathematics, and 25th in science. The total average of the students' performance was 470. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development reports. Their average for American students came in at 490, placing American students' academic performance well below other high-achieving OECD academic peers. So, what's the key to curving the trend and shrinking the gap? Well, my friends over at the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence seem to be tackling this issue head on and have some innovative ideas on how to solve this very conundrum. They're on a mission to transform the concept of public education so that every student is inspired and prepared to thrive as the best version of themselves. They accomplish this by focusing on three primary pillars: continuous improvement, student success, and student-centered approaches. Matt Navo is the executive director for the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. He's got more than 30 years of experience in education. As a K-12 educator, he's also been a superintendent, an assistant principal, and he's got a wealth of knowledge when it comes to system improvement as well, thus making this a great opportunity to bring you a conversation about how we can inch closer to making sure that America's kids embrace technology and the future of education to become the best leaders of tomorrow, today, that they can. So without further delay, my conversation with Navo starts right now. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. To welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn all about the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, my friend. It's great to see you, and thank you for all you do for the greater good of education, and it's great to see you this afternoon. Thank you so very much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
As am I, Matt, and I know as the executive director of the organization I just spoke with, my friend, you're all about inspiring possibilities and breaking down barriers so that students can reach their fullest potential. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about all the great work that you do and what makes your organization so fabulous, my friend.
So, it's going to be close to home for you. Back in 2012, 2011, our state lead directors, our state board chair, and at the time, Michael Kurse for the California education, and other educational leaders went to Ontario. And they were looking for a model that, and they found one in Ontario that would change education in California. And what it was Ontario has the Secretariat, as you know, and they have those entities or those educational institutions that have to deal with the compliance of education as it sits for local educators and how they accomplish the goals and meet the needs of students. But then they had built a model where there was a coordinated group that really just was practitioners about practitioners. So people from the field, educators, teachers, principals from the field who worked on behalf of principals and teachers in the field. People that came from understanding what the barriers were and could help design and support and encourage and innovate around education. And so fast forward to 2023, we have what's called the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. And what we do is we are 36 educators from across the state. We cover the entire state, 2,000 plus LEAs and over 10,000 schools. We cover districts that are 650,000 students in LA Unified to districts that are 5 to 10 students. And our goal is to work alongside the State Board of Education, the Department of Finance, the governor, and the state and the practitioners in the field to figure out how do we innovate education in such a way that it can transform it, that we can break through the barriers of what keeps education locked in its traditions and helps move people's thinking in a way that helps inspire them and inspire systems and inspire change on behalf of kids. And not just any kid, all kids. How do we really help and support the work in such a way that we come into space with people and we say, you know what, there's a better way to do business. There's a better way to organize yourselves. Yes, the state has goals. Yes, the state has compliance. Yes, the state has accountability. We get that. That's part of the job. It's part of the work. But that doesn't have to be the work. You can show up every day with an attitude of being prepared to help your students thrive in the world. And so our job is to come in as a third partner, help an organization see themselves in a mirror, help them identify things that are barriers that are in the way, belief systems, mindsets, structures and strategies and processes that are barricading students and tethering systems down to the old ways of thinking and getting them to move outside of that.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's a luxury spot for us to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, I'm also wondering your thoughts on your definition of what it means to offer students an equitable and quality education that's also inclusive, my friend. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, that it's a really great question, Kevin. I'm so glad you asked it because we get mired in the vocabulary of these things. I mean, it's hard to sometimes break it down into what does an equitable education mean? What does quality education mean? What does it mean when we say every student? The bottom line is we equate that every student in the state of California needs the options and opportunities to be successful and achieve their dreams. And as a result of that, there are things that we do as adults, how we behave, and there's systems that we organize and create that prevent students from getting what they need when they need it and how they need it so that they can be successful. So when we think about quality, we're thinking about all schools being operating at a very, very high standard. All teachers having the resources and the knowledge to do what they need to do, being equipped professionally and personally to tackle the challenges that students face and their communities face every day. And when we think of equitable, we're thinking of the system has what it needs to meet the needs of the students they have. Not everybody gets the same thing. Everybody gets what they require to make sure that students have the opportunities to be successful, achieve their dreams. And that just means that in some places in California, there's going to be schools that they don't need as much. They don't need as many resources. They don't need as many practitioners. They don't need as many interventions. The other places, they require an intensive deep dive. So when we think of students with disabilities, we have to think about what are the systems that we created with good intentions that have now created inequities in the system. In other words, their inability to participate, their inability to thrive, their inability to feel a sense of belonging, their inability to say, oh, I can accomplish the goals that I want to accomplish. The inability for the parents to access the system in an efficient and effective way. All of those things, when you break it down, anything that prevents a community or a family member or a student from achieving what they desire is pushing against the quality and equitable education we desire to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matt, I'm curious to get your perspective, both personally and professionally, on what it means to provide students with an innovative education, because that has a revolving and evolving definition, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And, there's a lot of different ways that people are thinking about innovation. I applaud educators right now in the midst of the post-COVID pandemic. We had to get really creative educators about how they met students' needs from in-person to virtual. At least in our experience here in California, it was a huge transition for many. And there was lots of innovative opportunities. But when we think about innovation in such a way, we're thinking about things and we're looking at districts that are the bright spots for this innovation. In 2019, there was a positive outliers report that came out that identified districts that were excelling beyond what people would expect them to do. And in all of those cases, they had some very, very, very basic foundational principles that they learned to operate. And it was how they structured and how they behaved. But one of those that was not is not really called out, is not as easily valued, was they all had a growth mindset. And when it came to the sense of failing, they failed forward. So they tried new things. So when we look at a bright spot right now, I'll just call out a district that I had a recent opportunity to visit. Lindsay Unified in California. Lindsay Unified has performance-based learning. This is learning that no longer has grades attached to it. This is learning that no longer is defined by time and grade. This is learning that is defined by learning content. So if you're a second grader in Lindsay Unified, but you're reading at third grade, you're doing third grade level work. If you're a 15-year-old who's already moving into high school content, you're moving into high school content. You can achieve graduation requirements as a sophomore and be done and be extending your learning into college and post-secondary dual enrollment courses. These grades, Fs, are eliminated. They're gone. They're more defined as in progress for that district. Those are innovative things that happen to that work outside the boundaries of traditional thinking and really galvanize people to a new way of thinking and a new way of doing business that empowers students. So if I'm a student with disabilities and I come to Lindsay Unified, I'm getting what I need, when I need it, how I need it. I can excel where I want to excel. If I don't finish a class well, I don't get an F. I have the opportunity, I go on to the next class, but I have the opportunity to fulfill that content as I need to with the supports that I require. That's what I would define as innovative and an example of what we're trying to do when we think about innovation. It's not just bringing technology into the classroom. Yes, innovative at the time. What we're talking about is breaking the traditions of normal school. Our state board chair talks about this a lot, Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, breaking the traditions of the regular school day and thinking more strategically about how we address the needs of the students when they have needs we're able to provide as educators.
Yeah, and Matt, I know that continual improvement in student success and always being learning and a sort of sponges of knowledge is important to you at the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. So we talk about continual improvement and progressive education. I'm wondering your thoughts on how we can continue to challenge students to reach the heights of their maximum potential, but also meeting them where they are and really tailoring their learning experiences for optimum success. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. That for educators, when the two things that complicate the ability for educators to really help maximize student success is the way that we design the system to improve. When you think about continuous improvement, and you think about the ongoing efforts that are required by an educational system to improve outcomes for students, it's an iteration after iteration. It's not a straight line. It doesn't just go from 0 to 100 over time. It porpoises. There are movements within a system that yes, some things go well and some things don't go well. And when you what happens in our systems is we tend to attach a number to the success and the measure of the profession of education through which we define as standards-based assessment or some type of school rating or some kind of accountability measure. And what that tends to do for educators is it forces them out of innovation and out of an infinite mindset around what they're trying to accomplish for students, and it puts them into more of a finite game, where they're trying to win the game because they're trying to avoid the low score. And we tend to do that with students as well. We tend to rate students by the quality. We rate their quality of them as a human being by a grade, which we know we're not going to get away from, but there's more important things to rating an adult in a school and a child by a score. There's more complexity involved in the way that child thinks or the experiences that they've had. And so when we can do, as an educational system, think in an infinite-minded way, what do we want to accomplish? What is our vision for students when they leave our organization? And we allow students to think about, and what do you want to become when you become a functioning adult? And constantly giving them the opportunity to assess their own learning and set their own goals and determine whether or not they're being successful with achieving those goals. And then us as educators coming in as a partner to think about the scores become very much less part of the conversation. The scores are maybe a dipstick into progress towards, but the goal never ends. And I think what we do in education is we ruin our ability to do that by scoring ourselves so finitely, and we ruin a kid's ability to think in an innovative way and to be aspirational dreamers because we score them in a finite way. There are multiple measures that should be used to really assess whether or not somebody is growing in the way that we want to grow. But when we do that to kids, and you see it in education, when kids are so excited about learning in kinder, first, second, all of a sudden in third and fourth, that excitement starts to wane. And I would argue that the reason that happens is we start to attach ability scoring to them, their ability to read, their ability to do math, and we score them in such a way that they begin to think not about education as something I'm going to enjoy because I enjoy learning, but something that defines who they are. And the same thing happens in education when states do it. They define a system by a finite number, and it ruins the ability for an educator or educators in that system to think innovatively and to be prosperous in the idea that they have dreams and goals for students they serve.
Yeah, and Matt, you brought up something that I want to follow up on, and that's capturing the imagination of students and really capturing their vision, and eagerness to learn. So how, as educators, do you think we can do a better job of maintaining a student's sort of imagination and eagerness to learn?
You know, the the best example I've seen is at a K-8 school in the Central Valley, Fairmont Elementary School. Fairmont Elementary School did something that is incredibly innovative, going back to breaking the traditions of regular public school, that has kept kids, I would argue, more engaged and more excited about learning, kept parents more excited, more engaged, more connected to the school. And what they did was they did something called they formed student learning communities from TK to 8th grade. And what they did simply was involve students in choice, engage them in the educational process in choice by helping them define the goals for what they want to learn, and more importantly, how they want to learn it. And it goes back to something all educators can do is, when we think about universal design for learning, a framework that helps teachers with their instructional practices and their instructional delivery, all of that is basically giving kids multiple ways to represent how they learn and multiple ways to choose to engage in how they learn. And when you and I went to school, Kevin, I would argue we had very little of that. You know, we sat into a classroom, probably in rows at the high school level, probably even rows at the elementary level, and it was stand and deliver. The teacher taught it, and if I didn't learn it, there was something wrong with me. And I think what's happening now in some of these innovation spaces, Fairmont would be a great example. So would Lindsay be a great example. So would Kings Canyon Unified being a great example. And there's others across the state. But I think that what's happening is that the teachers are being more focused on really finding multiple ways to engage students, engagement in things that interest them, having students define how they want to learn, having students choose how they want to demonstrate that learning. And when you do that, what happens for kids and what happens for educators, you get an excitement around learning that's never occurred. And one example would be an ed student who had the opportunity to, in alternative education students, you know, they go to alternative education because they're struggling in the traditional setting. Typically, they're struggling in the traditional setting for a variety of reasons, but one of which is they're not really excited about learning at times. They've got a lot of distractions outside of school that often keep them in a non-traditional setting. And when you ask the student in an alt-ed, you know, write a 2-page paragraph on the pros and cons of the Civil War, it's not a really engaging process. But when you give that opportunity for student to do it in a different way, one example would be, we had a student that from a previous district of mine who ended up singing, rapping creatively the pros and cons of the Civil War. And when they did that, they did it with passion, they did it with purpose, they actually learned. Now, in a traditional way, Kevin, that you and I experienced, that would not be an option. We would have had to write and demonstrate content knowledge and demonstrate understanding in the same way everybody else did, because that's the standard. But when the standard is just a goal and the opportunities to engage in that and demonstrate are in the child's hands, you get a lot more excitement, a lot more engagement, a lot more commitment from students and educators and parents, I would argue.
Yeah, and to that point, Matt, I'm also wondering your thoughts on the importance of technology and the new way of educating students, because I know as a California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, technology is also a big part of what you do, isn't it?
Oh, it's really opened the door for a lot of reasons. It's opened the door for educators because you can learn in real time. And if you just look at the basics of what technology has done during the pandemic, we probably, in a lot of places, still were struggling to bridge the gap. But more importantly, the technology is getting so advanced. Assistants, devices that assist students in the ability to learn are much more advanced than they were back when I was going to school. And it has opened the door for educators to be able to have students accomplish things that they weren't able to do in the past. And with the onset of artificial intelligence and AI, you know, we're at a kind of a crossroads with education. We're getting there right now. You can either fight the artificial intelligence and the things that it opens up for students, and you can try to keep kids in a traditional setting or a traditional model, or you can open it up. and figure out what it would help students be able to do. And technology advancement, there's a book that was recently published, the educating for the future we can't predict. And that was written not too long ago. And it was written by an author, Thomas Hatch, The Education We Need for a Future We Can't Predict. It was a great book. And I think he underscored the idea that we can't predict education because the technology advancement is high. And what we learned 5 years ago is obsolete now. But also, given what we've experienced with education, you have to educate for a future we can't predict, because there's, at this point, given with what we experienced with COVID, no one would have thought that we would have been out of school, or kids would have been out of school for so long. So the idea that technology is helping bridge that gap, helping educators say, yes, we're educating for today, but we're preparing for tomorrow, is really a helpful frame for people to think about as they think about technology.
Yeah, and as we enter this new age of education, I'm also fascinated at your new definition of what it means to offer students a collaborative education, because, as you've mentioned before, traditional learning experiences and models doesn't work for all students. So what does that mean to give students collaborative education choices and experiences today, in your view?
Sure. I love that question because it's twofold. It has implications for collaboration between teacher and student. How do I collaborate with my student, with my families, with my community in such a way that I can create a sense of belonging? I can create a sense of understanding as what's being asked. But the other option here is something that people don't talk about as often. It's the collaborative education between educators that's required to enable students to achieve what their goals and their dreams. And that does not happen as readily. So when you think about the basic structure between teacher and student, when a teacher shows up to his or her classroom and they have 30 different kids, and if you're at the secondary, it could be from 180 to 200 plus that are rotating through your classroom. How do I create an environment where students may not get their way, but they have an opportunity to get their say in the type of education they're experiencing, where they get a chance to give feedback around what worked for me in my learning today, what didn't work for me, do I feel safe at school? Do I have the opportunity to collaborate with administrators? Do I have an opportunity to give you my feedback in a survey form, or at least in some type of conversation that occurs regularly in some kind of cadence, where I have an opportunity to share with you what the system is doing, how it's working for me and working against me. But more importantly, it's the collaboration between teachers. If teachers often have prep time, Kevin, as you and I remember, they have preparation time defined in their workday that really gives them the opportunity to prepare their materials, to do the deep learning that's required to prepare their instruction for the next day. What they don't often have is collaboration time for me to get with other teachers to talk about student learning, to really answer what is it we want students to be able to do, know and be able to do. How will we know that they learned it? What will we do when learning doesn't take place? And what will we do when learning has already occurred? Really, the four questions of a professional learning community are often neglected in the collaboration conversation between teacher and student. They think of it as it's just between teacher and student. It's not. It's teacher-student. More importantly, it's between educators. How educators come together to create a collaborative environment for students is oftentimes missed.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, Matt, I'm curious, what's your definition of a great teacher? And what do you think teachers need to know about the value that they bring to education, that they sometimes neglect to realize how important they are in our societal ecosystem? So, in your view, what makes a great teacher?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really love that. And it seems like a simple answer, and it's not. There's not a simple answer to that, but I can tell you, a great teacher creates a sense of belonging for kids in the classroom. It's not their competency level. It's not how much they know about education and how about they know about their content. I think sometimes we get education gets a little bit distracted with, well, what do they know about math, or what do they know about literacy? Do they know how to teach reading? We can teach those things. We can learn those things as adults and educators. What we can't learn, and what doesn't come often natural, is the ability to care, the ability to show feeling, the ability to be vulnerable, the ability to have humility, the ability to show up with students and say, you know what, I love and I care for you enough that I'm going to create an environment that you want to be a part of. And that's going to take me a lot of work. Those soft skills that teachers oftentimes don't have, because don't bring or don't focus on, because they're so focused on, do I know my content? Do I understand the standards? Do I understand the mechanics of teaching? That we forget. And I think the best teachers, the ones that really are able to do this work and last the longest, show up with a degree of humility and create a sense of belonging, and they have a sense of vulnerability to them. Like, I don't know it all. I'm as much here to learn from your experience as students as you are to learn from me. And in the meantime, while they're doing that, they're learning the profession of teaching. They're learning from their colleagues. So their ability to absorb and willingness to learn and come with a growth and a learning mindset is really what sets them apart. But for me, and I imagine for you, Kevin, I imagine for your listeners, the teachers that they remember the most are not the ones that were the best at content. The teachers they remember the most were the ones that made them feel special about being in school. And for me, that's what sets a quality teacher apart from the rest.
Yeah, and Matt, I'll give you a quick story about one of my favorite memories from one of my educational sort of influences. So, Matt, as you know, I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. Simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally. And Matt, I actually found out at the age of 9 that I wouldn't be able to walk for the duration of my life because of the severity of my disability. But I truly believe, Matt, that inclusion is the gateway to independence, and the changing trajectory point of my life actually happened the day I was to start my 4th grade year of elementary school. So I found out in the summer of 1998, Matt, that I wouldn't be able to walk for the duration of my life. I was 9 years old at the time, and the day after I found that out, I returned to school the next day from the hospital, and I was called down to the principal's office, and Dr. Carol Crewley was my middle school principal, man, and she knew that I was headed to London the previous day, and she knew the reason why I was headed there, to be told that I wouldn't be able to walk for the duration of my life. So the next day when I got to the principal's office, she had a big space in the middle of her office for my wheelchair, and everyone assigned to my educational file, man, from teachers to social workers to therapists were a part of this meeting, and my parents were also there. And I went through the story of what Dr. Carey had told me the previous day about not being able to walk for the duration of my life. And then at the end of the story, Dr. Crewley stopped me and she said, the only limitations on your life are the artificial ones that you place on yourself personally. And that was sort of the turning point in my life. So education has played a huge part of my life. So I just wanted to share that story with you this afternoon.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story, Kevin. Thank you for sharing that with me. And that's a perfect example of an educator that's a quality educator.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Matt, I also wanted to get your thoughts on educational competition, and really where you think public schools are in the conversation of providing an equitable education as opposed to private or charter schools. So how can we make sure that students who attend public schools still get a quality and equitable education, considering the educational competition that's out there today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that. I love that question. Because right now, when you think about public schools are sitting in the vortex of conflict right now. When you think about the political views around what public schools are doing and not doing, you think about the personal views that parents may have, and they're on opposite sides of the spectrum. You think about student voice and where it sits in relationship to public schools. Public schools have never felt more pressure, more attacked, more inept to be able to deliver what they aspired, many educators aspired to get into the profession for. And I think we all entered education, at least as I reflect on my own education, and I wanted to be able to give students what they need. And oftentimes the barriers that prevented me from being able to provide an equitable education were not barriers that I had in as an educator myself. They were oftentimes barriers that were created by the system trying to eliminate barriers. And what I mean by that is, when we think about students with disabilities, and we think about an equitable education, I have my MA in special education. My first job was a fifth grade teacher. My second was working in a self-contained classroom with fourth, fifth, sixth grade students with disabilities. I moved on to moderate, severe disability service and ability service, and it was an eye-opening experience. And what I quickly realized was, boy, in my aspirational desire to provide my students an equitable education, I often found that the barriers within the system itself prevented me from providing equitable opportunities to them. One of which is and just getting them as simply on the general education's attendance roster. If it's something as simple as, who does this child belong to? Well, this child belongs to all of us. This child sits on the general education roster for a fifth grade teacher. I'm designed as a support to make sure that I support that teacher to reduce and eliminate barriers that might prevent that child from achieving the equitable outcomes they so deserve. And yet, even within the system that I was in, the student was rostered on my roster. And this ownership of responsibility for that student was perceived to be mine and mine alone. And often special education practitioners experience that. And they find themselves, well, why is that? Well, that's because the system requires a cap in most cases, to teachers' rosters. And if you put students with disabilities, you add to the cap. And sometimes that creates a situation where someone has to be paid or compensated for that. And so, not to get into the myriad of the weeds of it, but if equitable education is supposed to be designed to give every student what he or she needs, then my answer to that is the things that are preventing it are often the system structures that create it.
Yeah,
and you have to break those down.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ahmad, before you got the current role that you're in, I know that you've got a myriad of experiences, from being a superintendent of a school district to a fifth grade teacher, as you said, to a assistant principal. So you've certainly got a gamut of experience in a variety of different roles. And when you look at the quality of education today in terms of the challenges that still exist, I'm thinking about, in certain states in America, teachers are told by the government what they can and cannot say in a classroom, or can and cannot teach. So I'm curious, Matt, to ask you, what sort of challenges do you think exist from a broader scale as we educate our kids? And where do you
Yeah. I see it across. I used to work, prior to your point, Kevin, prior to the current role I'm in. I worked with WestEd, which is a national nonprofit organization that works with educators across the country. I had the luxury of working in the National Center for Systemic Improvement, where I worked with 29 states who were really focused on improving outcomes for their low-performing school systems. So I had an opportunity to really work and see a myriad of approaches that states were using, and the way that they approached that often were constructed out of the policies and politics of the current state leadership, for that matter. But here's something that I saw and experienced that was common across every state. They were trying to fix schools. And that right there, you can't fix schools. You can't fix people. You can't fix students. You can help people and students learn to improve. And you can help systems learn to improve. And so the next shiny object and the next quick fix that states were using, and they were pumping money into the next best thing, and all in an aspiration and a race to fix schools, was contrary to the idea of how you fix and transform schools. I came from a district that is nationally recognized now, wasn't back when I was started, as a transforming district. We experienced a transformation as a district, but we were highly dysfunctional, one of the lowest performing school districts in the state of California at the time. We didn't get there because we tried to fix the adults, fix the students, fix the families, fix the community, fix the state. We didn't get there. We got back to basics. And that's what I would argue where states need to go, back to basics. What is it that teachers need to be able to teach, and what do students need to be able to learn? And we get rid of the noise and the attraction to pumping money into things that sound great and may add to the resume of many of the policymakers that are trying to create solutions. And we get back to the things, the nitty-gritty of what it takes to really transform a school. And that means you have to have three things. You've got to have teachers with a foundation of collaboration. They've got to be able to collaborate in a structured process, in a structured way. You got to have robust interventions for students who need them, when they need them, real-time interventions that are evidence-based. And you got to have a high-quality instructional framework. You've got to have a way for teachers to talk about instruction, and for administrators to talk with teachers about instruction, and for coaches and teachers to talk about with classified about instruction, so that they all can talk the same language, so they can zero in on what's working and what's not working. And right now in education, I see a lot of independent contractors, not by choice, but because that's what the system does. It creates independent contractors. And until we create systems by nature that force more collaboration by team, and collaboration by team, I mean teachers and community and families and schools, we're not gonna get to a place where we actually can transform schools. We're going to be on this perpetual hamster wheel of trying to fix the system that cannot be fixed with money. It cannot be fixed with accountability. It cannot be fixed with compliance. It cannot be fixed with plans. The only way to transform schools, it can only be fixed by the people within it with a willingness and ability to do the right work on behalf of kids. And until you eliminate the tethers that anchor them from being able to do that, you're not going to be able to fix schools.
Yeah, and let's talk about one of the key pillars of that. And, that's improving the communication and the relationship building between the school community, the teachers, the administrators, and the people who run schools, and the parents, because I think it's a critical lifeline between the two in order to make sure that students really maximize their full learning and educational potential. So let's talk about improving communication between parents and the school community, and what you think needs to go into that process as well?
You know, part of the challenges that I've experienced with when communities are disengaged from the educational system is the educational system doesn't design with engagement. We're not communicating and developing the relationships in a way that really the community needs. So I'll give you an example. Most schools, when they think about how they engage with their communities, if you were to ask them to name 5 things that they do to engage their community, you're going to hear 5 of the most common things. You're going to have schools say, well, we have back to school nights, we have open houses, we have theater productions, we have performances, we have fundraisers. You're going to hear most of those being the mechanism for which we communicate the value of what we do and of which we relate with parents. Most parents, that is a passive way of engagement. That is, I show up and I receive something from you. I'm getting something from you, whether it's entertainment or information. If you ask parents to describe most of their back to school nights, they'll say they went into a classroom, the teacher told them what was expected of their students and what happens to their students if they get in trouble. And most schools will define that as communication and relationship building for parents. That's not it. It's got to be active engagement, where the parent comes to the school and actually makes a contribution for something. They actually offer you something and provide you with something that you need from them. Whether it's what their perspectives are, what they need at home to help their child read, what are they lacking in resources, what do they think about your school and how it can get better. Somehow, we have to shift the education mindset from being passively engaged and calling it active engagement to be actively engaged, where the parent shows up and says, this is what I need. How incredible would it be if a parent showed up to back to school night and the teacher engaged them and said, tell me about how your kids learn. Tell me how your kids learn best at home. What kind of resources do you have to be able to help them? Let me think about what I can do to meet your needs versus the rules and the standards and what they're required to learn. I think we just got to think something different.
Yeah, absolutely. And, selfishly, Matt, I wanted to ask you this question because, based on my personal experience of growing up in an educational system with a disability, I think that students with disabilities can provide the educational system with a different way or a different perspective of looking at things. So tell me, I know we've talked about it throughout our conversation, but I wanted to formalize it into a question and ask you, how can we make sure that students with disabilities can also have a competitive advantage? And I'll give you an example. I graduated college 14 years ago. And when I graduated college, part of my requirements to graduate, Matt, was that I had to complete an internship. And I went to school and I have a journalism degree in new media and communications. But one of the struggles that we had when I was graduating college was convincing news directors to give me an actual shot at an actual internship so that I could get the practical experience to get a job. In fact, when I graduated college, news directors would look at me and say, you're an energetic person with a lot of enthusiasm for our business, but because of your disability, we view you as a liability if we put you into the field of journalism and let you cover stories on your own. So the question for you, Matt, is how can we make sure that students with disabilities are granted a competitive advantage inside and outside of the classroom? So when they're done their educational experience or while they're still in it, they can get all of the competitive advantages of their non-disabled counterparts to ensure that they have a fulsome educational experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really appreciate your story too, Kevin, and what you offered and the experiences you had. And that's, it's unfortunate and unfortunately not uncommon, what you described around, having aspirational goals and not being seen by those in the profession as being able to or being capable of delivering on whatever it is that they need in that particular position. I think it starts with education and educating those outside the field of K-12, what we're trying to achieve for our students and our students with unique abilities, and incentivizing, whether it has to be through dual enrollment courses that have partnerships with job embedded learning for students with disabilities, or whether it comes through some other mechanism, putting students with disabilities as an asset based instead of a deficit based employment option. And you have a lot of students with disabilities and a lot of unique programs that are being created that are giving students those one-ups. I can think of a unique program right now in the Central Valley called Target. And it's a partnership between a local district and California State University, Fresno, where students with unique abilities go to post-secondary education to learn a skill set, to be employable. And part of the obligation when they go through that program is that they do find some level of employment. And most oftentimes that level of employment occurs at the university system, because they're in those job embedded experiences and they're getting to understand. And so the employers are getting an opportunity from the post-secondary to see, oh, these students can do a lot more than I thought they could do. I'm going to employ them as well. And it's most times we find resistance from whether it comes from workability programs or working during your school, and you have an educator who's responsible for going out and getting employment opportunities and setting. It's oftentimes the education opportunities that student brings to the employer. The employer doesn't see the assets that having a student with unique abilities brings to the table. Had that employer employed you, Kevin, you would have inspired and brought a level of interest from other people with unique abilities to that. And the aspirational goals of others that say, because you're there, I can do that, would have quadrupled just by the nature of you being there and being able to share your stories. And that helps the economy, that helps the community, that helps the family.
Yeah, absolutely. And my final question for you is a two-parter. I'm fascinated to ask you, what brings you the most hope for the future of education? And when you look at your own personal and professional legacy, Matt, how do you want that to be defined?
Oh, those are two good ones. I'll be quick. I'm most hopeful about what education has today because we are at an inflection point, and we have no choice but to solve education by coming together and working together. If it continues to go the way it's going and what we experience continues, we're going to have a really hard time encouraging future educators to buy into the experience of being an educator. And I believe that education has an opportunity right now to come together as practitioners and solve problems together. And I think you're seeing more and more states, to your point, Kevin, your last question about collaboration being a really interesting point of addressing the needs. You got to get those closest to the work, solving the problems of the day. You can't have those closest to the work, furthest away from policy development, furthest away from solution seeking. You've got to have those boots on the ground involved in the problem solving, and you'll get solutions. And for me, I just hope that, I don't even think about my personal and professional legacy, but I hope that when people think about what I bring to the table, I bring a unique ability to connect with people, inspire people to do their best work so that they can do the best work on behalf of kids. So when they think of, something that Matt could offer, he was a good educator about enabling us as a team to do the best work on behalf of kids. And as the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, that's what we do as a team. We inspire adults and we support adults so that those who are closest to the work can do their best work on behalf of kids so that they can thrive and be their best selves in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matt, tell me, if people want to get connected to the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, what's the best way they can do that?
Sure. The best way is to go to our website. It's CCEE-CA.org. So CCEE-CA.org. And that website, there's a subscribe button at the bottom. You subscribe to all of our information and all of our listserv. You can find out a myriad of things that we're doing within our state, within our with our state partners, and that's the best way to get a hold of us.
Well, fabulous, Matt. As I can tell, we share a mutual passion for moving the needle of progress forward when it comes to the field of cooperative and inclusive education. So I want to thank you for your good work to give all students in the state of California an equal and equitable shot at a promising future, my friend. Your work in the space of education and time on my behalf is most appreciated this afternoon, and I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me. It's most appreciated.
My pleasure, Kevin. It was a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.